Dear viewers, this is our weekly program of Expert Speaks, where one expert will come and talk about the subjects which are very pertinent to you. For this week's program, I have taken the subject called Goods and Service Tax, or popularly known as GST. So, we are going to discuss what is this GST all about and how it is relevant in your life. This is NRI Money Clinic for you, and I am Dr. Chandrakant Bhatt, your financial guide for a happy living.
NRI Money Clinic. No hype, just the right advice.
Dear viewers, we here at NRI Money Clinic are trying to solve many of the problems faced by the NRI community. We are in a position to solve the problems faced by this community here in India. But our NRI community has lots of questions, lots of problems in the countries where they are living. If you are a professional who is working in US, Canada, UK, Ireland, Eurozone, Singapore, Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, China, or any other countries where you have an NRI community, you have a chance to appear on our channel. If you are one of the professionals, chartered public accountant, a tax specialist, financial planner, or advisors in any other financial field, then probably we have an interest in you and you get a chance to appear on our channel. If you are interested to appear on our channel to discuss the problems faced by the NRI community in your respective countries, please send us a WhatsApp message on the number shown here on the screen. We will get in touch with you and we explore the possibilities of associating with you. Dear viewers, to talk about the terminology of GST or to know more about the goods and service tax, I have requested an eminent faculty to join me in this particular show. The faculty of the day who is going to talk about this particular topic is practicing chartered accountant Laxmi. Laxmi is a very popular chartered accountant in Bangalore. She is a partner at Nitinjay Shetty and Company, an expert on GST subject, an ex-banker. She has delivered lectures in several institutes and she has solved the problems of GST related issues of many businesses and individuals. Welcome to this show, Laxmi.
Thank you.
It's a great honor to have you on my show today, and I want you to help my audience understand the finer points of GST. See, whenever we talk about this taxation, the audience is always get excited about it. We have been talking about all these days on terminologies like double tax avoidance agreement, income tax and other things. These days we get to hear the topic of GST. What is this GST? Can you briefly tell to the benefit of our audience what are the things that they need to know about it?
GST, as the name suggests, is a tax on goods and services. It is a form of indirect tax that levies tax on the event supply, and supply can be of goods or services. We are all covered under GST as recipients of supply. You would have all noticed GST being levied on the goods that you purchase, maybe in terms of household, clothing or footwear, or the services that you avail from a restaurant, hotel accommodation or beauty treatment. Like this, we are all recipients of supply. Now, the goods that we purchase or the services that we avail has a term in GST. It is called as inward supply of goods or services. Now, when will a person be liable under GST as a supplier of goods or services depends on the transaction he gets involved in. If he is involved in an outward supply, that is, if he is providing a supply of goods or services, he can be liable for a GST registration depending upon the transactions he is involved in and the conditions for registration under GST. So, that can make him liable for GST to collect and pay taxes to the government. So, this is GST.
Laxmi, you while explaining about GST, you use the word supply. Okay, it's a very vast subject and it's a very has lot of scope. Can you describe what is considered as supply here?
As you said, supply is a very wide term, and the definition of supply given under GST is an inclusive definition. And supply includes any sale, transfer, barter, license, exchange, lease, rental or disposal which are made for a consideration in the course or furtherance of business. Supply also includes import of services for a consideration, even if it is not in the course or furtherance of business. Supply also includes activities that are mentioned in Schedule 1 of the Act, which will be supply even if there is no consideration involved. For example, the disposal of business assets or the supply of goods between a principal, agent, etc. Now, supply does not include the activities which are mentioned in Schedule 3 of the Act. Some examples would include sale of immovable property or the services by an employee to his employer, etc. Now, alcoholic liquor for human consumption and petrol, diesel, natural gas and aviation turbine fuel are the products which are kept outside the purview of GST. That means these goods or the activities that are mentioned in Schedule 3 of the Act are not a supply at all.
Laxmi, you mentioned about supply and what constitutes a supply and what is left out from the word supply. Our audience is spread across globe. There are NRIs, many of them are NRIs here. Now, when you talk about supply, does it apply to something which is supplied inside India, or does it have a scope to be considered beyond the shores of India? How does the law see this term supply?
Supply, in addition to the supply of goods or services that is made within the country, which is made within India, supply also includes the supplies that are made from India to outside India in terms of exports, and supply from outside India to India in terms of imports. So, supply not only includes the transactions that take place within India, it includes the exports and imports as well.
Lakshmi, one question that comes to my mind is, you spoke about supply, what it includes, and you also clarified that it can come from within India, outside India, the scope you explained. One thing which stands here is, supply has to be made by a business entity. Now, only when a supply is made by a business entity, the GST gets applied, or it covers individuals, or is there anything else we need to know about GST when it gets applied?
Yes. See, the term business, which I mentioned, which is very relevant under the definition of supply, the business is defined under the GST law, and business includes any trade, commerce, manufacture, profession, vocation, adventure or any other similar activity or any other activity which is ancillary to this activity, which is carried on even if it is not for a pecuniary benefit. And there is no requirement that there should be volume, frequency, continuity or regularity in the transaction, which means that even if a transaction is done at a single instance, it can be liable for GST if it qualifies the definition of supply and the requirements for registration under the GST Act. Let me summarize. That is, our normal understanding is GST will be applicable only when a business is carried on regularly or on a continuous or consistent basis. But that is not the case under GST. GST does not define the term business as something which is carried on for the purpose of making profits or which are carried on a continuous basis. It only defines the term supply if the supply takes place which makes the person liable for GST registration. That is, if he crosses the threshold limit required for the purpose of registration, or it is a transaction that mandates him to obtain a registration irrespective of the value of his aggregate turnover, he still will be liable for GST.
So, GST revolves around the word supply here.
Yes.
Okay, as long as the supply is there, whether it happens for a consideration or a profit, whether it is done by an institution or an individual, whether it can be repetitive or one single transaction. So, the GST can be applied in that case. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, sir, you are very correct.
Right.
That is, GST revolves around the term supply.
Right.
So, it does not matter if supply is carried on by a business entity, maybe like a company or a firm or an individual. The term used in GST is a person who carries out a taxable supply.
Okay.
That makes him liable for GST registration.
Okay. Lakshmi, during the course of our discussion, you told that where supply gets involved, GST is considered, and it is not applicable in case of sale of immovable properties. I am getting a doubt in my mind. Real estate is a favorite investment activity. Residents as well as NRIs keep dealing with these builders, and if immovable property is not covered under GST, why does the builder talk about GST collection at the time of signing an agreement or something like that? Can you give clarity? Are the builders doing something wrong, or there is more to that word, or is there something more that we need to understand with respect to sale of immovable properties?
Sure, sir. Sale of immovable property is outside the purview of GST, and GST cannot be levied on sale of immovable property. But a building under construction is not an immovable property under GST. That is, when a person is purchasing an apartment from a builder or developer, when the building is under construction, he is liable to pay GST to the builder or developer because he is availing construction services from the builder. Whereas, if the said apartment is purchased after receiving the completion certificate for the building, then it is an immovable property and there is no question of GST on the said transaction.
Now I got the answers for this. So, if somebody is booking a flat which is under construction, that is where the GST becomes applicable,
Yes.
where they are availing a service which
Yes.
involves supply.
Yes.
So, once it is completed, it becomes immovable property and it's a commodity.
Yes.
So, in that case, GST is not applicable.
Not applicable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation, and probably it took out the doubts that could have been there in the minds of our audience. Laxmi, I understood most part of what I need to understand about the GST from a common man's perspective. One of the things that comes to my mind is, now where there is a supply is involved, there is a obligation to pay GST. How will this GST gets paid to the state? Somebody just walks into some bank counter or government office, you pay GST, or is there a mechanism of registration, or you go and pay it? How does the system work in this case?
Yes. There are GST law mandates the conditions upon which a person shall be liable for GST registration. That is, when a person makes a taxable supply of goods or service, he can be liable for GST registration if his aggregate turnover exceeds rupees 20 lakhs in a financial year. In some special category states like Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland and Tripura, the threshold limit of 20 lakhs gets replaced by rupees 10 lakhs. So, a person who does a taxable supply of goods or service shall be liable for GST registration if his aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit of maybe 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs as the case may be.
When you mention that, there is a limitation here, or I would use the term when the turnover crosses 20 lakhs or the 10 lakhs as specified in your detailing, only then the registration is required. Does it mean to say if the threshold is less than that, they don't need to pay the GST on that?
Normally, the GST registration depends upon the threshold limit, the aggregate turnover of 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, but there are some certain transactions, for example, export of goods, that will make a person liable for GST registration irrespective of the value of aggregate turnover. There are certain transactions which are specified under GST, which shall make him mandatorily liable for registration irrespective of the value of aggregate turnover.
Okay, so if I understood you very correctly, what I got is, in the normal cases, subjected to these ceilings, a registration is not required, or he is not required to pay the GST. But there are certain activities like what you said, like kind of an export, where irrespective of the turnover threshold, the registration towards GST is required.
Yes.
Is that the correct thing?
Correct, sir.
Right.
Yes.
So, dear viewers, if you are a person who is liable to pay GST, and if your turnover is less than 20 lakhs for most part of India, or in those specified states what Laxmi has told, which is within the 10 lakhs, then you need not pay GST, or you don't have to go for a GST registration. But if your turnover exceeds these limits, or if your activity is such an activity which requires registration for GST irrespective of your volume, then a GST registration is called for.
Yes.
During the course of our discussion, you mentioned two words for me. One is called the taxable supply. The other word you used is the aggregate amount per annum,
Yes.
the total per year. Are these two the same, or is it something different?
Not all supplies are taxable supplies. Once we identify a particular transaction to qualify as a supply, we should then check if that supply enjoys any specific exemption under the GST law. So, the specific exemption comes by way of government notifications where certain supply of goods and services has been exempted by the government. Now, if a person is involved in exclusive supply of exempt goods or service, he will not be liable for GST registration even if the aggregate turnover crosses the threshold limit. Now, if a supply is not enjoying any exemption, then we call that supply as a taxable supply. And once a supply is a taxable supply, it can make that person liable for GST registration if the aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit of 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs. Now, what is aggregate turnover? Aggregate turnover is the total of taxable and exempt supplies. For example, a person is making an exempt supply of rupees 10 lakhs and making a taxable supply of rupees 15 lakhs. Individually, the value of taxable supply has not exceeded the threshold limit of 20 lakhs. But put together, taxable and exempt supply has crossed 20 lakhs, which will make that person liable for a GST registration. Getting a registration under GST, he will be liable to pay taxes only on the taxable value of supply of rupees 15 lakhs and not on the exempt supply. So, what makes a person liable for GST registration is not alone the taxable supplies he does. Even if he is doing an exempt supply and put together the total of all the supplies made by him crosses the threshold limit, it will make him liable for registration under GST.
That's an awesome explanation, Laxmi. That's really clarifies a lot of things. Dear viewers, if you are a person who is engaged in supply of something and if it is completely exempted under GST, irrespective of your turnover, you don't need not take a GST registration for that. But if you are somebody who is doing activity, a portion of which is not covered under GST and a portion of this is covered under the GST, then the aggregate of these two things are taken into account to find out whether you have to take a GST registration or not. But at the time of the payment of the GST, you are liable to pay GST only for that portion which comes under the taxable nature under the GST, and you can leave out that portion which is exempted under the as per the stipulation of the law.
Yes.
Right?
Right, sir.
Thank you. One another terminology that is commonly heard or discussed is under the GST, one you pay GST to the state. There is another terminology is called the input tax credit.
Yes.
If you are in a business, you are paying GST to somebody else and you are charging GST to your suppliers or your customers. What is this word input tax credit? Can you explain in briefly for the benefit of our audience?
Yes, sir. Input tax credit, initially I had mentioned that all of us are recipients of supply as purchasers of goods or availers of service. Now, this has a term under GST, it is called as inward supply of goods or service. Now, the tax that we pay on inward supply is called as input tax. Now, if a recipient of supply, if a recipient of inward supply is a supplier of goods and services as well, that means he is involved in an outward supply of goods or services wherein he is liable to collect and pay taxes on the outward supply, he shall be eligible to take the benefit of the input tax that he has already paid on his inward supplies and pay only the balance to the government. For example, a person who is involved in an outward supply is liable to pay taxes of rupees 18, that is, he is collecting an amount of rupees 18 from his customers on the outward supply he does, and he has already incurred an amount of rupees 10 on the inward supply of goods or service that he has purchased or availed for the purpose of doing his outward supply, that is, it is related to the business that he is involved in. And on the inward supply, he has incurred an amount of rupees 10 as input tax. So, the output tax of rupees 18 minus the input tax of rupees 10, only the balance of rupees 8 he shall be liable to pay to the government. So, this benefit of netting off the input tax from the output tax liability is called as input tax credit.
So, it is something which is very beneficial to the customer. So, they do not have to pay taxes at multiple points of time. At every stage where it goes through a value addition, so the customer is paying taxes only for the additional value building
Yes.
up what
To the
happens.
supply,
That's the
yes.
whole idea behind this
Yes.
input tax credit.
Yes.
One last question, Lakshmi. You have explained this so beautifully. Is GST something very specific to India, or are you aware that is there GST in other parts of the world also?
GST is not alone in India. There are about 160 countries across the globe that has adopted the system of GST or VAT. But the rules, the regulations, the procedures of execution, the rates of taxes will differ from country to country.
That has been a very, very useful discussion, Lakshmi, and thank you very much for bringing all these points for the benefit of our audience. I, on behalf of NRI Money Clinic and on behalf of my audience, big thank you to you for spending your time and giving all this knowledge for the benefit of our owners.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Dear viewers, hope the video that we have done today helped you to understand what is GST, when should somebody register for GST services, and all finer points which are applicable with respect to GST in your life. If it helped you to understand these points, please like this video. If you are a person who is watching this channel for the first time, or if you are yet to subscribe for the channel, please hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon. Don't forget to share these videos with all the people who think can get benefited from these videos. Thank you very much for watching NRI Money Clinic. I shall be back with you with yet another topic in yet another video very, very soon.
Press the bell icon for more details and subscribe our channel.